5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This isn't a film about war. This isn't a film about Iraq. It's a film about money.
That's life. That's life. That's what all
$23 billion. Wasted, stolen, embezzled, or just lost down the back of a very big sofa in the desert. Tonight we're following the money.
It's cost plus baby, and the more they bill, the more they make.
Halliburton, proud to serve our troops.
I said that's life.
They are the quintessential war profiteers. They made money out of chaos.
Some people tried to get the money back.
That's the way they saw me, as a troublemaker, as a skunk at the picnic.
But the $23 billion question now is, will the whole truth about the profits of war ever come out?
Sad to say, I'm not allowed to say.
Frank Willis put his golf on hold to serve his country, not as a soldier, but as a civilian.
When we first arrived, it reminded me of the stories of the Wild West. Sand blew, flies bit, and we had to pay people by carrying sacks of money around.
Frank found himself in Saddam's palace, his job to get the transport system working.
Down in the basement of the palace was a vault, and in the vault was a lot of money. Money was checked out of that vault and then used for payment.
Billions of dollars were being stacked on pallets and flown to Iraq. The bombs had stopped falling. Now it was time to bombard the country with cash. Some of it US taxpayer dollars, some Iraqi funds seized during years of sanctions.
We had a contract with the group that provided security at Baghdad International Airport, a group called Custer Battles. They were to be paid in cash at the beginning of every month of their 12-month contract with us. And the initial payments were $2 million in $100 bills stacked in bricks of $100,000 each, which is just a little smaller than a football. So in fact, we tossed some of the bricks around in a mock-up game of football, waiting for Mike Battles to come by.
What were they like, Mr. Custer and Mr. Battles?
They were swashbuckling heroes who came in to take names and kick rear ends and move forward. They didn't know the word no. They were masters of a chaotic universe over there.
Iraq was a get-rich-quick opportunity that attracted some real chancers. Scott Custer had been a soldier. He was descended from a more famous Custer, but Scott would be luckier than the general. Mike Battles had been a Republican Party candidate. That was a real door opener when it came to winning contracts.
He was given special permission from a White House committee to go over as a civilian to Iraq and literally go door to door in the green zone, asking government officials what kind of work that he could do. And he was able to do that simply because he was regarded as a friend of the Bush administration and for no other reason.
Custer Battles had no experience of running big projects and only a few $100 between them, but they won a $16 million contract.
We're guarding Baghdad International Airport. We do everything from the perimeter security to the luggage screening.
It didn't take long for them to spot extra money-making opportunities.
They found Iraqi Airways forklifts in the green and white Iraqi Airways colors. So what they did was they painted them over so that nobody could see that they were Iraqi Airways forklifts. And then they took these forklifts that they found at the airport and they leased them back to the U.S. government for $20,000 a month.
$20,000 a month?
For each one. That's right, each.
Custer Battles latched on to someone who could actually get things done in a war zone.
This is an interview with Bob Isaacson in Dallas.
A former FBI man, Bob Isaacson, became their subcontractor, and Custer Battles managers tried to interest him in a little scam.
And he said, oh no, what we'll do is we'll form companies outside of Iraq, and we'll funnel all of our expenses through those companies, and we can double the expenses, and that'll be profit there. So if we pay $20,000 for something, we'll show the government we paid $40,000, and then we'll make our markup of 10 or 15 or 20% on top of that.
Don't worry, be happy.
What Custer Battles did was set up shell companies in the Cayman Islands to rack up their costs with false receipts.
And I said, we can't do that. I won't do that. That's illegal. In America, that's completely illegal. He said, oh, well, we always do it that way. And I said, well, no, we don't do it that way with me. We're not going to do that.
Scott Custer tried to persuade Bob to cooperate, but he still refused. Custer Battles enforcers got to work.
12 hours later, they terminated me, and they pulled guns on us and forced us out of the camp.
So you were basically put out on the streets of Baghdad at a time when security was deteriorating and told to make your own way home.
Oh, that's right. My judgment, what I made up, it was the idea if we got killed, nobody would know what happened to us, and the millions of dollars in assets that they had just stolen from me would become theirs, and there would be no more hearing from Robert J. Isaacson. I'd be gone.
Bob never got his equipment back, or the money he was owed by Custer Battles. But Mike and Scott went from strength to strength. Iraqis were rioting because the Americans couldn't distribute the new currency fast enough. Custer and Battles promised to get hold of trucks to ship the cash around. Another contract.
They bought trucks in the local Baghdad market that simply didn't work. Lives were in fact put in danger. Some of these trucks had brakes that failed. Each one of these trucks carrying $15 million worth of currency. You were left with a $15 million target sitting in the middle of the road, and it couldn't be moved.
Mike Battles was summoned to meet American officials. There was a row, and he stormed out, but left behind his briefcase. Inside were spreadsheets showing how the Cayman Islands scam magically turned their real costs of $3 million into 10.
I think of Custer Battles as the poster child of early contracting abuse.
Custer Battles won $100 million worth of contracts in the first year after the invasion, and Bob Isaacson hired a lawyer.
Hello, this is Lieutenant Kojak, Manhattan South. Yes, I need a DA to prepare a warrant.
They had been given a contract to spend anything they wanted, buy anything they want. They'd be able to mark that up 25%, but that wasn't good enough for them. They were just too greedy.
They are the quintessential war profiteers. They made money out of chaos.
This anti-war Democrat and lawyer is key to the campaign questioning those profits of war. He represents whistleblowers from all over America with hair-raising stories to tell of fraud and mismanagement.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time.
The country's been kept in the dark about just how much money has disappeared in a war in which private contractors ended up outnumbering soldiers. Government lawyers have put gagging orders on no fewer than 70 cases.
Do they involve big American contractors?
I'm not allowed to say.
I find myself alone.
But we've discovered the gagging orders involve some of the biggest names in corporate America.
Does it involve KBR and Halliburton?
Well, you have to understand, if there's a gag order in place, that gag order applies not only to the whistleblowers, but it applies to me as well. So I'm literally not allowed to say.
What about Parsons, for example, another big contractor?
I'm not allowed to say.
And Bechtel?
Sad to say, I'm not allowed to say.
So would it be fair to say, to deduce, that there are most of the major American contractors involved in cases which are sealed and which we effectively can't talk about?
That would be a fair inference, but I'm not allowed to say.
But there are a few whistleblowers who brought private cases and can't be gagged. I set out on a trip across America to find them and discover how the greatest heist in history happened and who'd pocketed the cash.
You got to help me.
I headed first to Texas, heartland of the Republican Party, and President George Bush. Home originally to one of America's biggest corporations, Halliburton. They started out in oil, but found war was profitable too, from Vietnam to Bosnia, now Iraq.
Our employees are doing a great job. We're feeding the soldiers, we're rebuilding Iraq.
Halliburton can perform miracles of logistics. They struck deals to bring all-American brands like Burger King and Subway to the front line. $25 billion worth of US government contracts in all. They've kept the soldiers happy, but what about the taxpayer? It was in Texas that I met another whistleblower. His job was to keep an eye on the catering contracts. Barrington Godfrey was an auditor for KBR, the Halliburton subsidiary which fed the troops so well.
I was told, don't worry about the cost of these things. Don't worry about it, whether it's competitive or not. This is what's important. We have to have cash flow.
With most contracts, you agree a price before you start to encourage efficiency. But in Iraq, most contracts were cost plus. Whatever KBR spent, their costs would be covered, plus a percentage on top.
That's the KBR arrangement with the government. It's cost plus. So basically, the more money that flows, the more money KBR makes.
When Barrington did a head count at an army base in Mosul and compared it to KBR's invoices, he was puzzled. The company was charging for thousands of meals they weren't actually serving.
How much do you think that all added up to?
Well, I've done estimates in the Mosul area, $10 to $15 million, just in the time I was involved.
$10 to $15 million just in the few months you were there?
For one site.
The more that Halliburton claims to spend, the more it can bill to the government. As one of our clients testified before Congress, her boss told her, don't worry about it, it's cost plus, baby. And the more they bill, the more they make.
Halliburton, proud to serve our troops.
How did Halliburton win such fat contracts in Mr. Bush's war?
Bad-looking birds.
As America was counting down to war, a contract worth potentially $7 billion landed on the desk of a top official at the Pentagon. But not just any official.
They called me a stickler for the rules, and but that was my job. That was the oath of office that I had taken.
The most senior civilian in charge of contracting for the US Army Corps of Engineers, Bunny Greenhouse, was surprised. There was only one company bidding for the contract to rebuild Iraq's oil industry: Halliburton.
There were many other companies out there who could have competed for this, but they weren't aware of it. And that was not being fair, to those contractors, and it wasn't being fair to the government, because we want to make sure that we're getting best value.
Pentagon officials told her not to worry. The invasion was imminent. It justified the lack of competition. Bunny objected. Halliburton should only get a short-term contract, she said, not a 5-year option. But she was overruled.
Federal law tells us that we must conduct the business of procurement with the highest degree of integrity, beyond reproach and with preferential treatment toward none.
Toward none?
Toward none.
And is that what was happening?
That is not what was happening. And I questioned that. I questioned what I saw were potential conflicts of interest.
Join me in a warm, thunderous Fort Hood welcome for the Vice President of the United States, Richard Cheney.
There was, of course, something special about Halliburton, something controversial. Dick Cheney. At Fort Hood in Texas, I watched as he saluted the troops.
On the ground in Iraq during all of 2007, you amassed a superb record. And I'm here to say thanks and welcome home.
Mr. Cheney was the boss of Halliburton before he became vice president and architect of the Iraq War. Oh, and he was once defense secretary too, in charge of the Pentagon.
Well, let me tell you about Halliburton, the company I ran. I'm very proud of what I did at Halliburton. The people of Halliburton are very proud of what they've accomplished, and I frankly don't feel any need to apologize for the way I've spent my time over the last 5 years as the CEO and chairman of a major American corporation.
So could the vice president be linked in any way to Halliburton's profitable relationship with the Pentagon?
Yeah, baby!
Most definitely, according to the Democrats in Congress. Henry Waxman's committee has led the charge. Unable to stop the war in Iraq, Bush's opponents have shifted their battleground to the issue of war profiteering.
Halliburton had a special relationship with very high-up people in the Bush administration. How much was that a factor in the contracts that they won and the amount of money they managed to make?
For the longest time, I accepted the word of Vice President Cheney, who had been the CEO of Halliburton, that neither he nor his office had anything to do with these contracts. But after a year of our investigations on the Iraqi contracts, we found out that it wasn't the way the Vice President claimed it to have been.
Then came the revelation of a confidential email from inside the Pentagon. It said that action on the Halliburton contract had been coordinated with the Vice President's office.
The confirmation of that contract was by a group which included Vice President Cheney's chief of staff. None of them thought perhaps there would be an inappropriate appearance of conflict because Cheney had come from Halliburton. They didn't see it that way.
Mr. Cheney has said he played no role whatsoever in government contract decisions involving Halliburton.
Sheer deception. Great. Silverway steering wheel. Even the clouds are quiet.
The American war machine has long relied on private contractors, supplying everything from security guards to short-order cooks. That principle of buying in expertise isn't in question. The bravery of civilian employees not in doubt. But it's the corporate excesses in Iraq that have angered those who expected better. The KBR auditor, Barrington Godfrey, got back from leave after a suicide bomber attacked the Mosul base. He found out that a KBR supervisor had used the bombing to milk the government of an extra $1 million in unnecessary charges.
This was the most disappointing part of my KBR career, that somebody would take advantage of such a tragedy, where I think there were at least 23 people killed, including U.S. soldiers, contractor staff, and KBR staff were killed.
You've heard a lot about Halliburton lately. Criticism is okay. We can take it. Criticism is not failure. Our employees are doing a great job. We're feeding the soldiers. We're rebuilding Iraq. Will things go wrong? Sure they will. It's a war zone. We're serving the troops because of what we know. not who we know.
Halliburton, proud to serve our troops.
Mr. Cheney always said he'd given up his financial stake in Halliburton when he became vice president. But it seems that he'd bowled a fast one. 2 years after the invasion, it was revealed that Mr. Cheney still had stock options in Halliburton. It was only then that he sold $8 million worth and gave the money to charity. He still got nearly $5 million worth of those options. The war was ringing the tills for corporate America. But what about their people, civilians on the front line? Was profit put before their safety? Over 1,000 KBR truckers deliver the bullets and the beans in huge convoys, snaking across the Badlands. It feels like 1,000,000 miles away from Oregon, where I met the family of one driver who signed up for KBR in Iraq 4 years ago. Reggie Lane was attracted by the pay and the advert, which assured him he'd be 100% safe, not a promise the military would ever make.
They had promised that the people who would go over there to work would be well protected.
But Reggie found himself dodging bullets. There weren't enough troops to protect the convoys. Angry truckers even filmed themselves under fire.
God damn!
Reg is not one to tell me that they're getting shot at.
I'm fixing to get killed, goddammit!
He's not one to tell me that it's terrifying over there.
April the 9th, 2004 was Good Friday. KBR convoys came under sustained, coordinated attack from first thing in the morning. One driver was kidnapped, his ordeal recorded by a film crew passing at that moment.
What's happened?
Oh. They attacked our convoy. That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay.
Several hours after the attacks began, Reggie was told to go out on a convoy.
And these drivers knew something was up, and they were ordered by the KBR to get in their trucks and to drive. He took an RPG through the window of his truck. It went in the window and took off his right arm, just below the elbow. And then someone shot him on his left arm and shattered both bones. And he was in pretty bad shape. Lost a lot of blood.
Reggie's heart stopped. His brain was severely damaged.
I can't taste a cold beer, and I think he'd like to do that. He can't put his arms around me.
Six truckers and 2 soldiers died that day. Many others suffered serious injuries.
KBR promised protection for these people, and I think they failed to provide it.
"19 truckers' families are suing KBR for failing to protect them. 110 civilians working for KBR have been killed in Iraq. KBR says its priority remains the safety and security of all its employees, and it is saddened by the events of April the 9th. But 2 KBR drivers told Congress the company ran empty trucks across Iraq, despite the risk to their truckers. No one knows why, but with cost plus, the more they rolled, the more KBR made. A Pentagon audit found that Halliburton overcharged by $108 million for supplying and trucking fuel. Critics reject Halliburton's protest that out of revenues of $20 billion, they only made $500 million profit because of the difficult environment.
It gets me very angry when I think about the waste of money and mismanagement. A war shouldn't be an opportunity for some people to get rich, while our young men and women are making, in many cases, the ultimate sacrifice of their lives.
Mr. Waxman's committee only began probing the contracts in Iraq a year after the invasion. But not to worry, somebody had been keeping watch before that. So where would you find a reputable auditor capable of overseeing all those billions? In the financial powerhouse of New York, perhaps? The reality's less Wall Street, more Wisteria Lane. It's here the story of the missing billions becomes really bizarre.
It's hard to believe it, but this quiet neighborhood in Southern California actually holds the key to the secret of what happened to billions of dollars that have gone missing.
This ordinary-looking house in La Jolla is home to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Howell and their company. Its speciality? Kitchen design. But the Howells apparently have other skills. Another of their companies registered in the house, North Star, won the contract to set up an oversight system for all those pallet loads of cash that arrived at the palace after the invasion. The contract asked for certified public accountants. North Star had none.
Keep going a little bit more and stop.
To this day, $8 billion North Star was overseeing is not properly accounted for.
Mr. Howell?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. We wanted to know if we could ask you some questions about North Star and Iraq. We're doing some research into the Iraq Reconstruction Fund.
Yeah, there's nothing basically to answer. It's all documented.
And was it a Pentagon contract, or?
Yeah.
And can you say any more about that? But can I ask you why the job wasn't done, Mr. Howell? The Inspector General for Iraq said the job wasn't effectively done.
So why did they get the contract?
Well, we don't know why they got the contract. It's inexplicable to us. It looks like a sweetheart deal that they got this contract because they didn't have the capability or the competence. They were chosen without competing bids. And we're not sure what they did for that contract.
Sheer deception. Great. Tilt away steering wheel. It's irresistible. Even the clouds are brighter.
North Star was small time compared to what some of America's biggest corporate names began to fritter away in Iraq. Congress appointed Stuart Bowen, Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, to find out what on earth was happening to the money.
The challenge right out of the box was the expenditure of an enormous amount of U.S. taxpayer dollars, the largest foreign aid program since the Marshall Plan. Fraud is the smallest component to date, but waste and mismanagement has been the challenge, and that's largely driven by the security environment over there.
In 19 trips to Iraq, the Inspector Generals uncovered the scale of the bungling and waste by some of America's best-known companies.
What a difference it will make in the life of Iraqi children
when they have a modern medical facility right in their own country.
There was Project Hope, championed by Laura Bush. Bechtel got a $50 million contract to build a children's hospital in Basra. But the cost trebled, and their contract wasn't renewed. Not surprisingly, Bechtel blames the insurgency. 24 local workers were killed. US Army engineers were left to pick up the pieces and finish the hospital. Worst of all is the saga of Iraq's health clinics. Parsons were contracted to build 150 of them.
I've described it as the single largest failure of any program in the Iraq Relief and Reconstruction enterprise. $186 million was spent under the Parsons contract. By the time the contract was completed, 6 clinics had been turned over to
just six
to the Iraqi government.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's not so much how I feel, it's the fact that a very important program that would have helped millions of Iraqis fell off the rails.
Parsons say the clinics were never funded adequately, and they were told to cut construction time from 2 years to 1.
Sheer deception.
Great. Took away steering wheel.
Mismanagement, fraud and waste are only part of the story of rebuilding Iraq. The country desperately needed security. Enter the private military companies. The insurgency was a golden opportunity for big players like Blackwater. The Bush administration were keen to outsource the battle space. The issue here isn't fraud, but the legal framework these companies operate within. In September last year, Blackwater guards fired on a group of people in Baghdad, killing 17, including a mother and child. The FBI is still investigating, but the Iraqi government says Blackwater opened fire first. It wasn't the only time. Congress called Blackwater's boss, Eric Prince, to answer for his company's record.
Blackwater appears to have fostered a culture of shoot first and sometimes kill, and then ask the questions.
You do admit that Blackwater personnel have shot and killed innocent civilians, don't you?
No, sir, I disagree with that. I think there's been times when guys are using defensive force to protect themselves, to protect the package they're trying to get away from danger. There could be ricochets, there are traffic accidents. Yes, this is war.
Eric Prince's family has given hundreds of thousands of dollars to Republican causes. Mr. Prince was an intern in the White House when George Bush's father was president. Blackwater's contracts to guard US diplomats and generals are worth over $1 billion. None of its employees have been tried or convicted over any of the 195 shootings. After the invasion, the Americans passed a law giving foreign contractors immunity from prosecution in Iraq.
My question is in regards to private military contractors. I asked your Secretary of Defense a couple months ago what law governs their actions. Mr.
I was going to ask him. Go ahead. Help.
Well, I was hoping your answer might be a little more specific.
I don't mean to be dodging the question, although it's kind of convenient in this case, but never.
British security companies have won contracts from the Americans too. And that took us to Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Last October on this road, a local radio journalist was sharing a taxi with another man and his sister. Kurdistan's relatively safe and peaceful compared to other parts of the country. But suddenly, they found themselves under fire. Exactly why is disputed.
The first bullet hit my ear. I fell badly injured. The second hit my arm. Now my arm doesn't work, and I lost my ear.
There were bullets. They were shooting.
I touched my eye. It was sticking out. My head was open.
The local police chief who'd heard the gunshots was rushing to the scene. He wanted to stop the gunmen leaving, find out who they were.
I tried to stop them. I went to the road and raised my hand, but they didn't stop. They'd got their weapons ready to shoot, and I didn't want the problem to get worse.
Afterwards, the police discovered the gunmen were from a British security company called Erinis. They were guarding some US Army engineers, and their convoy had stopped to mend a tire. Erinis later said the taxi had driven around stationary traffic, fast towards them, ignoring their warning signals.
How fast were you going, and did you see anybody on the side of the road telling you to stop with flashing lights and sirens?
There was nothing. We didn't know it was a military vehicle or a family car. We couldn't see them from that distance. There were no signals. They just hit us for no reason.
Erinis said that carefully aimed disabling shots were fired into the engine block. The pictures of the taxi taken on the day show 3 bullet holes through the windscreen. Not aimed at the driver, Erinis told us, but shots that bounced off the road. Its men said no police were present, and they only left when an ambulance arrived. Sanger lost half his ear. His hearing's permanently damaged. Zirak lost an eye and needs an operation to remove shrapnel which could blind him. All each victim received was £1,200 from the US Army. No word at that time from Erinis.
They told me it will cost me a lot of money, more than $50,000. No company has called me, and they haven't done anything for me. I'm left like this.
What exactly happened that day will never be resolved by a court here. That law passed by the Americans gives Erinis guards immunity in Iraq. Erinis turned down our interview request, saying a US Army report supports its actions as a graduated professional response to a potential suicide attack.
State-of-the-art technologies, innovative business strategy.
Is there any military duty which hasn't been privatized in Iraq? And what control should there be in such a chaotic place?
And soon America will have a real choice.
Next stop, Princeton, and another whistleblower. Eric Fair is training to be a minister in the church. He supported the war in Iraq and put his CV on the internet to see if he could get a job there.
Khaki offered the job of interrogation. I'd been a police officer, I'd been a linguist, and that seemed like an interesting job.
Khaki, an American technology corporation, had won a contract to supply interrogators. Eric wasn't a soldier, he was a civilian. But he was sent to Abu Ghraib, notorious for those pictures. Eric worked alongside the military as the war intensified, along with the pressure to get information out of prisoners.
It was out of control, there were no lines, there was no clear idea who was in charge. In some ways it felt like a high school locker room, that there was hazing. In other ways people were clearly experimenting with things that were just sort of cruel and inhuman.
The pictures of the abuse by US military police and civilian interrogators were taken in the so-called hard site at Abu Ghraib. Eric didn't work there, but he was given a tour one day by a Khaki colleague who did.
My interrogations at Abu Ghraib were not abusive. I used direct line questioning. The hard site was a different place, and everyone has seen the pictures and heard the stories, and I can say with certain confidence that it's a lot worse than most people think.
It was worse than people think?
Absolutely. The photographs that you've seen were the tip of the iceberg.
An army investigation later confirmed that dogs had been set on prisoners. One of the men who did that, the same Khaki employee who showed Eric around. Official reports also highlighted the confusion between the military and civilian chain of command, and the lack of oversight of khaki personnel.
We were out on an island at Abu Ghraib, but there was no one that we reported to. There was no one that was looking at our status reports. None of those things.
And no one checking up on the behavior of the employees of khaki?
No. We were essentially checking up on ourselves.
Khaki has always said it fulfilled the requirements and conditions imposed on it by the US Army in Iraq. While some of the military involved have been court-martialed, no khaki employee has been indicted or convicted of abuse at Abu Ghraib.
Any military role in a war zone is not the providence of civilians. That is to be done by uniformed soldiers.
And the results when it's not?
The results when it's not is chaos.
Sheer deception.
Great. Tilt away steering wheel.
How does Acton in West London and this anonymous semi fit into the story of the missing billions? After a year of struggling to run Iraq, the American civilian administration gave up. They shipped out and handed over all those reconstruction dollars to a new Iraqi government. How would they cope with spending all that lovely cash? The US did appoint someone to fight corruption in the new ministries. A judge known as the most honest man in Iraq.
Interview with Judge Radi.
Corruption has a long history in Iraq, but now it's growing, spreading all over.
The Americans handpicked the new Iraqi government from exiles they'd known before the invasion. One of them was Hazem Shalan, now Minister of Defense. Like many of his colleagues, he had no relevant experience. He's the man who'd lived in that house in Acton, a small-time businessman sometimes surviving on the dole.
Rebuilding the Ministry of Defense was essential for Iraq's security and protecting its borders. But all Hazem Shalan did when he became Minister of Defense was bring in a bunch of his irresponsible cronies.
The Iraqi army was desperate for up-to-date weapons to fight the insurgents. So Hazem Shalan and his cronies embarked on a massive shopping spree. But did they go for the market leaders in military hardware? No, they went to Poland.
They signed contracts in Poland to buy aeroplanes, to buy ambulances, to buy armored personnel carriers, to buy ammunition. The money was paid out, but the equipment was never delivered. Or when it was delivered, it was faulty or obsolete and rotten.
Shalan's gang bought bargain basement hardware, but they claimed for top-class stuff. They diverted the ministry's funds into a company called, appropriately, the Ever-Flowing Spring. It channeled money into their own bank accounts.
I believe these people are criminals. They failed to rebuild the Ministry of Defense, and as a result, the violence, the bloodshed went on and on. The murder of Iraqis and foreigners continues, and they bear responsibility.
Mr. Shalan was sentenced to 2 jail terms, but he'd already fled the country.
Now he's flying about between the United Arab Emirates, Kurdistan, and London on a private jet.
Some of Mr. Shalan's dollars ended up in London too. He bought properties in the district near Marble Arch, where the Middle Eastern community hangs out. Mr. Shalan used to be seen pretty regularly in these cafes along the Edgware Road, but not now. He is, though, still raking in money from his properties in the area, but it's too dangerous for him to be seen here now, especially with this Interpol warrant out for his arrest. I went back to Mr. Shalan's old home in Acton, which he still owns, to see if anyone there knew where he was.
I contacted someone, my friends, but he told me he's not here at the moment. He's abroad.
He's abroad?
Yeah, he's in Jordan.
In Jordan? Do you know when he'll be back here?
I don't know really.
No.
I contact with my friend.
Yes.
He know where is the Mr. Hazim. Okay?
Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
I'd tried to track down Mr. Shalan in 5 different countries to hear his side of the story, but he never got back in touch. He's claimed he's innocent, and the decision to arrest him was all a plot by pro-Iranian MPs in the government. As for the judge, he's a penniless outcast in America these days. He blew the whistle not only on Shalan, but on many other high-ranking Iraqi officials. And he's paid the price. His home in Baghdad was targeted by a missile. 31 of his investigators have been murdered. Judge Radi and his family can't go home. The present government accused him of corruption when he started probing what they were up to. So far, the saga of Iraq's reconstruction has been a sorry tale of plunder. But what about the future as the country starts to stabilize? Some people always suspected this war was about oil, and they still do. But with prices rocketing at the pumps, there's a new killing to be made. Iraq's revenues will be twice what was forecast for this year, thanks to oil. It's fueling a new bonanza in the north in Kurdistan. There's been a stampede of foreign businessmen keen to cash in. It's boom time, and the black stuff means Kurdistan has the potential to be very rich indeed.
I mean, just look at this. There's so much oil in Kurdistan, it's literally oozing out of the mountainsides. And if this lot was exploited, then it could put Kurdistan in the top league of oil producers in the world.
Some foreign oil companies were quick off the mark. They've already started drilling. More than 20 deals have been signed with companies from across the globe.
Well, look, you can see that the map of Kurdistan is absolutely dotted with oil concessions awarded to foreign companies. And once again, the Texas Old Boy Network is in on the act. This concession here has been awarded to Hunt Oil of Texas.
Hunt Oil is the granddaddy of the Texas oil scene. H.L. Hunt, who founded it, was once described as the richest man in America. J.R. Ewing, they say, is modelled on him. His son Ray now runs the company. He's worth $4 billion, and he's a big supporter of the Bush family and Republican causes. He donated $35 million to George Bush's presidential library. The president put Ray Hunt on his Foreign Intelligence Committee with special access to information about Iraq. That's not the only thing that makes this oil deal controversial. The State Department warned Hunt Oil not to sign a contract with the Kurds. That's because it may not be theirs to sell off. Baghdad says it's illegal. The Kurds have no right to sell oil that belongs to all Iraqis on terms that favour foreign companies.
The oil minister in Baghdad has said that these oil deals that you've done with foreign companies are basically illegal.
We have independent opinion and we have the constitution, and if it is illegal, we will be the first to tear up these contracts. I have no problem. We are not mismanaging it. We're doing the best contracts you actually sign in history.
These oil deals aren't only political dynamite. They're dogged by accusations of corruption because they're not open and above board.
Well, these Kurdish oil deals are about as transparent as a pool of this black stuff. The Kurdish people don't know, even the Kurdish parliament hasn't been told. It's just a tight circle of the ruling elite who know who gets what and the fees involved.
The Hunt oil deal in Kurdistan has got Congress asking questions again.
I'm very concerned about it because Mr. Hunt from Hunt Oil was on the advisory committee appointed by President Bush to look at what's happening with Iraq, and suddenly he makes a contract with the Kurds. I'm troubled why Mr. Hunt would have been involved in this when he had a different responsibility that looks to me like a conflict of interest.
Mr. Hunt has said his ties to the Bush family and the Republicans didn't help Hunt Oil to strike the deal in Kurdistan.
And soon America will have a real choice. State-of-the-art technology, innovative business methods.
Sheer deception.
Great. Tilt-away steering wheel.
George Bush has only 6 months left to run. Only his staunchest supporters would deny his legacy's been tainted by the failure to rebuild Iraq. While he remains in place, so will those gagging orders on 70 whistleblower cases. They could reveal even more embarrassing details about what happened to the money. So what does Mr. Bush's administration have to say about all of this?
We asked the White House for an interview, but they refused. And the Pentagon. And the Justice Department. What about concrete results? How many people have gone to jail as a result of your audits, your investigations and subsequent action?
5 are in prison now as a result of our investigations. We have 50 ongoing investigations.
5 years on, no major private contractor has had to face court for fraud, for mismanagement of substantial amounts of money in Iraq.
No, we haven't taken a contractor to court. We do have a suspension and debarment process that holds them accountable.
But shouldn't some of these people actually be facing court for what they've done, facing trial for embezzlement, effectively?
And if we can develop the evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that embezzlement and fraud occurred, then we will do that.
So did the poster boys, Scott Custer and Mike Battles, caught with the evidence of their fraud, end up in jail? Well, they were debarred from military contracts, but they're not behind bars. Instead, they retired to Florida. Scott Custer still lives here in a $1 million house on a private estate. The pair turned down the chance for a chat with me, but their lawyer told us that Mike and Scott had very little direct supervision over the operations of their company in Iraq. And what about our whistleblowers? Bob Isaacson had his day in court to see a jury fine Custer Battles $10 million. The judge later suspended the case on a technicality, but it's not over yet.
To come out of this war and not prosecute those that are stealing, while the British soldiers and the American soldiers, primarily, and the other coalition soldiers, are dying and being maimed every day, is the most disgraceful thing I could ever think of.
What about Bunny Greenhouse? Well, after she objected to that Halliburton contract, she was demoted for what the Army said was her poor work performance. Meanwhile, one of Bunny's old colleagues at the Pentagon moved on to a top job with Halliburton.
That's the way they saw me, as a troublemaker, as a skunk at the picnic. But it was absolutely the most blatant disregard, for the federal procurement law and the process that I had ever seen in all of the years that I'd worked in government contracting.
What happened to Sanger and Zirak, who got shot in Kurdistan? Erinis had told us they would have been prepared to offer compensation, but the victims had never been in touch. Then suddenly there was an interesting development. 7 months after the incident, and after we contacted Erinis, they did send someone to meet the victims and discuss what could be done. Nothing has yet been agreed. Reggie Lane, the KBR trucker, will be in a care home for the rest of his days. The company offered Linda a Freedom Medal and a $25,000 payment, dependent on signing a legal waiver. She refused and is suing KBR.
I've never seen anybody come in here to see how he's doing, you know, from KBR. To say, hey Reggie, what do you need? How are you doing? There are no words that can describe what I've been through with the man I love.
KBR split from Halliburton, and they've just won part of another big army contract in Iraq, worth $50 billion. KBR declined our request for an interview. The British government awarded a contract to supply our troops in Iraq as well. It went to KBR. Alan Grayson, the whistleblower's lawyer, will be fighting his war for many years to come.
Some would say you've stood for Congress as a Democrat. You have a political axe to grind, and that's why you attack the Bush administration over this question of contract fraud.
I think that if anybody, any human being, knew what I know about the war in Iraq, they would feel the same way about the war in Iraq as I do. The only people who have actually benefited from the war in Iraq are the Iranians, Al-Qaeda, and Halliburton.
And when people look back on the Iraq war and the reconstruction effort, and they say war profiteering, that's what it was about, the privatization of a war, what do you think?
I don't agree. I don't see an agenda that overarched this process, which you would have to assume in order to reach that conclusion. The outcomes there, as everyone knows, have been mixed, but it's taken a while and it's been a tough process.
The Iraqi people don't have electricity, even in Baghdad, most of the time. They don't have safe drinking water. But the money that's gone into waste, fraud, and abuse under these contracts is just so outrageous. It's so egregious. It may well turn out to be the largest war profiteering in history.
US and Iraqi government agencies have come up with a series of figures for what's been stolen, what's missing, and not properly accounted for. We've pieced them together.
That's life. That's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April and shot down in May.
See, the key to any con is placing the mark in a position where he thinks that reward will come or harm will be avoided if he does exactly as he is told by the character assumed by the con man.